It is now time for question period. The Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Premier, as you know, as of last week, General Motors confirmed that the Camaro will no longer be built in Oshawa. Ontario lost out to Lansing, Michigan, just across the border. In response, all we've heard from your Minister of Economic Development are talking points about optimism. Well, Premier, optimism alone doesn't secure jobs. So can you tell us, what is your plan to keep GM in Oshawa?
Well, Mr. Speaker, and I know the Minister of Economic Development and Employment is going to want to speak to this, but I would say, first of all, we're not going to apologize for being optimistic about the economy in Ontario, Mr. Speaker, because we are optimistic. We know that the fact that our government has invested over $850 million in the auto sector, which has leveraged $11 billion in private sector investment, Mr. Speaker, that's a very, very good thing, Mr. Speaker. And since the summer, Ontario has seen nearly $4 billion in new auto investments. So what's happening, Mr. Speaker, is that the decisions we made in terms of the auto sector, decisions that the party opposite did not support, Mr. Speaker, those decisions have actually borne fruit, and the auto sector is recovering, Mr. Speaker, and we're very much a part of that recovery.
Back to the Premier. Premier, I'm a little baffled by that response. Maybe you haven't got it straight.
Deputy House Leader, come to order.
Hang in the balance. Your economy's doing so well, you lost the Camaro. You didn't win a new contract with GM. It went right across the border to Lansing, Michigan. So I wouldn't be bragging about the economy, and I wouldn't be babbling on about the past either. 3,700 people, workers at GM, are looking for an answer about their futures and their future job prospects. So I'll give you an opportunity again. What concrete steps are you taking, other than being optimistic, what concrete steps are you taking to secure those jobs in Oshawa?
Yes. Well, Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite full knows, this is not a new decision, and obviously we're concerned when there's job loss. Every time there is a job loss in Ontario, Mr. Speaker, we're concerned about that. But, Mr. Speaker, we're also pleased and optimistic when there are job gains. So, Mr. Speaker, March this year, partnership with Toyota Boshoko Canada to expand the Elmira manufacturing plant, Mr. Speaker, which created and sustained over 450 jobs. February 2015, just last month, Mr. Speaker, Ford Oakville, 400 new jobs for the Edge facility. And, Mr. Speaker, last month as well, GM, the same company that the member opposite is talking about, $560 million for the Ingersoll facility, Mr. Speaker, which will sustain 3,000 jobs. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we do have to look at overall the auto sector story in Ontario, and it is a good one, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary.
Back to the Premier. As you know, the GM commitments that were made during the bailout are set to expire in the next few months, right as production at the Oshawa plant comes to an end. GM hasn't committed to staying in Oshawa, and by your answers today, you're not committing to stay in Oshawa, but I'll give you a chance to do so. Have you given up on Oshawa, or can you promise that they will be there for many years to come?
Good question.
Minister of Economic Development.
Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the member opposite in his party, this government has been there to support the auto sector every step of the way. We're talking about a party, Mr. Speaker, during the depths of the recession that wanted to completely kiss off the auto sector, Mr. Speaker. The quote from them is, "Let those plants close." They would have cost us 500,000 jobs across this province. We're working hard with GM. We're working hard, Mr. Speaker, with our partners in Labour. We're going to do everything we can to land a future mandate in Oshawa. We're optimistic, and we won't apologize for that. After $4 billion of investment since November in this province, Mr. Speaker, our auto sector is going in the right direction because we supported them during the recession. Thank God we didn't take your advice, which would have cost us 500,000 jobs directly.
Thank you. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. New question. The member from Frontenac, Lennox and Addington.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Premier, I ask you this question today because in the last 5 years, your government has gone through 5 Labour ministers, and I'm sure you have a far greater grasp on the WSIB portfolio than any of them. given that your chief of staff was once employed there. Premier, are you aware of the existence of any slush funds at the WSIB, specifically ones that have existed for many years, despite explicit recommendations to shut those funds down?
Minister of Labour.
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Speaker. The Workplace Safety Insurance Board, I think all members know, plays in this province a huge role in ensuring that the workplaces, those injured workers that are injured at work, get treated in the way they should. The existence, I mean, the member's question, I don't know where it's going, Speaker. Certainly, slush funds are not something that I deal with, and I hope no member of this House deals with when it comes to any aspect of government in the province of Ontario. But I think that the people...
Order. Order. Next comment will get warned. Please.
Speaker, I think all members of this House understand that the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board has undergone some changes in the recent past. Those changes have all been positive. They have moved this board from a previous position of where they were perhaps not able to fulfill their obligations to a point right now where they're extremely healthy, serving the workers of the province of Ontario and the employers of this province, Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Well, maybe they just don't want to talk about it. Premier, there's been a fund that has handed out over $1 million to the Ontario Federation of Labour every year. Premier, from what I can tell, there has never been any oversight of this fund whatsoever. No applications, no reportings, and zero value for money. Since 2003, the OFL has received $12.3 million from this fund. Premier, why does your minister hand over more than $1 million a year with zero oversight and no transparency?
Thank you, Speaker. The member will know that it's a partnership that exists in the province of Ontario. This government treats injured workers very, very seriously. This government treats accident prevention very, very seriously. What that means in the province of Ontario is we deal with a number of health and safety partners, Speaker. We deal with business organizations. We deal with labour organizations. We treat them in a financially responsible manner, and also we treat them with respect. And, Speaker, the injured workers in the province of Ontario are served very, very well by the Workplace Safety Insurance Board, and I'd be prepared to back them up any day of the week. Thank you, Speaker.
Final supplementary.
Well, it's good to hear that the minister wants to back them up because nobody else does. My question is very simple. This grant to the Ontario Federation of Labour has been audited, and it has explicitly been recommended by KPMG to be shut down, as it absolutely has no value for money for the taxpayers of Ontario. Premier, it hasn't been shut down. I want to know why it hasn't been shut down. KPMG has told you that this program is worthless. It's just a slush fund for the OFL, and it's political pressures from your ministry that is keeping that slush fund going.
Minister.
Speaker, I'll let our partners decide what they think about that question. What I can tell you about the financial operation of the WSIB is that under Mr. Marshall's leadership, this board has made significant improvements to its unfunded liability. It was $9 billion of the...
Order, please. Thank you. Finish, please.
Thank you, Speaker. The WSIB unfunded liability has decreased by $1.6 billion since December the 31st, 2013. What I would say, Speaker, is that we've done that as a result of working with business, of working with labour, of working with injured workers groups in the province of Ontario to ensure that we're leaders in this regard, Speaker. And the premise behind the honourable member's question,
the member from Hamilton Mountain, come to order.
That I simply do not agree with. I would ask him to bring me any other facts he has, but certainly from my perspective, the relationship we have with organized labour and the WSIB has with organized labour.
Thank you. Your question, the member from Kitchener-Waterloo.
Thank you very much. To the Premier. Last June, Don Drummond, the hand-picked Liberal cutting czar, went on TV to say that the Liberal plan would mean firing 100,000 people. How many people will the Premier be firing in this spring's budget?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me say to the member opposite that when she has an opportunity to read the budget, she will see, Mr. Speaker, that we are continuing to invest in the people of this province, to invest in their talent and their skills, to invest in infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, to work in partnership with business and to create a dynamic business environment, Mr. Speaker, and to set up a retirement security plan, Mr. Speaker, that will allow people to have more security when they retire. So, in fact, the plan that we ran on, and in fact, the fiscal assumptions that party ran on, Mr. Speaker, are exactly what we are implementing right now. And yes, we are being responsible. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we have committed to eliminating the deficit by 2017-18. But we are not doing that by cutting and slashing, Mr. Speaker.
Answer.
That's what the opposition party said they were going to do, Mr. Speaker. We're making the investments that we know are going to lead to a.
Thank you. Supplementary.
So the Liberals seem to think that Mike Harris-style cuts and privatized hydro is the only way to invest in Ontario. The Premier seems to think that you can either have public hydro companies or public transit. She doesn't believe that you can have both, but I know that she's wrong. Just last year, the Auditor General found that $8 billion was wasted on P3s. When the budget is introduced, the Premier will be insisting she needs to privatize hydro to pay for transit. But will she miraculously be able to find billions to waste on more sweetheart P3 deals?
Mr. Speaker, let's just step back from the premise of this question and just make it clear that the reason, Mr. Speaker, that we are able to make the investments that we are, Mr. Speaker, in transit, in roads, in bridges, Mr. Speaker, is that we have made some decisions, one of which is to review the assets of the people of Ontario, Mr. Speaker, that are owned by the people of Ontario, and to make sure that we can leverage those assets in order to invest in the infrastructure that is needed for the 21st century, Mr. Speaker. So, underlying that decision is the need to invest in transit and transportation infrastructure. So, in fact, the plan that the party opposite ran on, the third party ran on, was the plan that we had constructed, Mr. Speaker, that we had developed, and it's the plan that we're implementing, including a review of that.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
So last April, the Premier of this province said, we won't cut education, health care or social services. And yet somehow, here we are. The Liberals are cutting education, they're cutting health care, and they're cutting services. Liberal incompetence and corruption shouldn't cost Ontarians. Can the Premier explain why she can always find the checkbook when she needs to bury a Liberal scandal, but that same checkbook is mysteriously missing when it comes to schools or childcare?
Dangerously close to unparliamentary, and I'm going to remind you in any other questions coming up, it better not get that close again.
Speaker, and you know, I've known the member opposite since she was a school community advisor in Toronto, and I know she understands how much money we have put into education, and I know that she understands that we continue to increase our education budgets, Mr. Speaker. I know she also understands that school boards have to make local decisions, Mr. Speaker. But she also, in May 2014, I just want to make a comment on the member's quote. She said,
Thank you. Finish, please.
The decisions that we're having to make, Mr. Speaker, and the plan that they ran on. I'm going to quote CBC News from May 28th of 2014, and I quote, Catherine Fife, the Ontario NDP candidate for Kitchener-Waterloo, says her party's proposed Savings and Accountability Minister would look to find efficiencies in the healthcare and post-secondary education sectors in order to find $600 million in annual savings. That's more than we've chosen to do, Mr. Speaker.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Order. New question. Member from Kitchener-Waterloo.
And to the Premier, I don't have to find that money. The Auditor General found that money for you, and it's $8 billion. So the Liberal government claims that the cupboard is empty, and the only solution is to fire
Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing,
and sell off even more of the hydro system to Bay Street speculators. I think we can agree that there is a problem with the books. It's Liberal incompetence, pure and simple. Wasting $1 billion on gas plants, $1 billion on e-health, hundreds of millions on Orange, and a whopping $8 billion on sweetheart deals for private developers will do that. That's what happens. It will create a problem with the books. But the good news is that there are solutions, Premier, like stopping P3s, closing HST loopholes, or cracking down on millionaire CEOs in the public sector. Is the Premier going to keep cutting schools and firing nurses so that she can afford to blow billions on P3s and corporate HST giveaways?
You know, Mr. Speaker, what's interesting is if we look across the world, really, we look at jurisdictions that are building infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. We look at jurisdictions that are
the member from Renfrew, come to order.
Making sure that they have the ability to upgrade, Mr. Speaker, the infrastructure that will allow them to compete in the 21st century. You will see governments that are working with the private sector, Mr. Speaker. Now, I know that the NDP basically doesn't want to change anything. They don't want to review the assets, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to change the alcohol distribution system, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to build transit and transportation infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. They basically want to maintain the status quo as though that will make us competitive in the 21st century. Well, it won't, Mr. Speaker. We're going to be competitive, we're going to move ahead, and we're going to do that by making the decisions that will allow us to invest in this province.
Thank you. Stop the clock, please. Be seated, please. Be seated. Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, last June, the Premier of this province said, "Will we implement a program of layoffs?" Absolutely not. 50 nurses are being fired at CHEO, 42 nurses in Sudbury, 22 nurses in Cambridge, 15 nurses in Leamington, 18,000 nursing hours in New Liskeard, 15 PSWs in Guelph, 38 full-time equivalents in Timmins, 7 full-time equivalents in Ottawa. I would call that a program of layoffs. What does the Premier call it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I call it not even half the story, because, Mr. Speaker, as those changes are happening, there is hiring going on, Mr. Speaker. We are investing in the healthcare system. More than $21 billion in healthcare infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. 23 new hospitals have been built or are underway since 2003, Mr. Speaker. 5,000 doctors since 2003 and 24,000 nurses, Mr. Speaker. So is the healthcare system in a transition? Absolutely. Are we moving more care into the community? Absolutely. Have the funding formulas changed for hospitals? Yes, they have, Mr. Speaker. But that doesn't mean that there are fewer people in the system, Mr. Speaker. That means that we're delivering services in ways that people demand and need and improving service in healthcare, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary.
You know, Premier, the people of this province aren't interested in your stories. They're interested in services. When a senior wonders why they can't get a care from a nurse, the Premier will say, it's because the well is dry. When a student is wondering why their neighbourhood school is closing, the Premier will say, because the well is dry.
Minister of Tourism.
When a parent has to quit their job because their affordable childcare space is cut, the Premier will say, it's because the well is dry. But when a Liberal-friendly construction firm shows up looking for a P3 contract with plenty of fat, the Liberals get out the checkbook. And when there is a Liberal scandal...
Minister of Economic Development, come to order.
Will the Premier do the right thing? Will she clean up the corruptions and scandals?
Stop the clock. The Minister of Economic Development chose to continue heckling after I said to stop, so now he's got 2. Please finish.
So the question, will the Premier do the right thing? Will you clean up the mess that is this government and address the scandals and start putting the people of this province ahead of Liberal friends?
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker...
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Order. Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And underpinning the question that the member of the third party is asking is, will we stop changing things? Will we stop transforming government? Will we stop building, Mr. Speaker? Will we stop investing in education so that we can have a 21st century education system for our kids? Will we stop investing in transforming the healthcare system? No, Mr. Speaker, we won't. We are going to continue those investments. We are going to continue to work with our healthcare providers, with our educators, Mr. Speaker, to make the changes that are necessary.
House Leader.
The third party doesn't believe that we should be investing in transit. They don't believe we should be investing in transportation infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. They don't believe we should change anything. We do not ascribe to that belief system. We believe there must be change, and we believe that the investments that we are making right now are necessary for the 21st century economy, Mr. Speaker.
New question, the member from Nepean Carleton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Good morning, Premier. Yesterday, her government called anti-SLAPP legislation for debate. Ontarians do see through this in the face of a SLAPP suit initiated by the Premier herself against myself and the member for Niagara West Glanbrook. She's suing me.
Order. Please finish.
Now listen, she's suing me for comparing her to Richard Nixon. But Richard Nixon's tapes had an 18.5-minute gap. The Pat Sorbara and Jerry Lougheed tapes in the Sudbury by-election scandal are there for the whole province
Minister of
to
Energy.
hear or listen to. In fact, the Sorbara-Lougheed tapes are the subject of not one, but 2 criminal investigations. Now that the Premier has outpaced the former Premier Dalton McGuinty in criminal investigations into her office, the Premier's office, doesn't she think it's time to stop muzzling the opposition and withdraw that lawsuit?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So the lawsuit to which the member opposite refers is the one in which I have obviously I have kept it in place, Mr. Speaker, because the comments made by the members from Niagara West Glanbrook and Nepean Carleton were untrue, and they were without evidence, Mr. Speaker. And I am always and have been willing to debate the truth, Mr. Speaker. I was always willing to debate the relocations of the gas plants. That's fair, but absolutely unfounded, baseless allegations are not, Mr. Speaker, and all I'm saying is that I'm always willing to debate the truth, but not unfounded allegations.
Thank you.
The truth right here. The biggest threat to the Premier's reputation is she herself. Her deathbed conversion to selling off hydro, selling beer and wine in grocery stores, and eliminating 100,000 public service jobs like nurses at CHEO and education workers at the Toronto District School Board are everything she campaigned against, everything she told this Assembly she would fight against if she became Premier. Her support for anti-SLAPP legislation flies in the face of everything she has done in the last year. There are now 4 criminal investigations into her government, 2 into her own office since she initiated this latest SLAPP suit. She has 2 new scandals in SAMS and social housing. All of that is fact. All I'm saying here today, Premier, is do the right thing, allow the opposition to question you without any repercussions, withdraw that suit, and do the right thing for the people in this province.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when I took that step, I did not take it lightly, and my only contention is that we should be dealing in the truth. And the member from Leeds, Grenville, come to order. I spent day after day after day.
I'm calling Tony Smith. The member from Leeds, Grenville, 2, continued after I asked him to stop. He's got 2. The member, the Deputy House Leader, is now warned. Who's next? Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I spent day after day here in this House and in front of committee, Mr. Speaker, answering questions about
Member from
about the
Nepean
gas
Carleton, come to order.
relocations. And all I'm suggesting is that we should deal in the truth and not in allegations. Mr. Speaker, in terms of the decisions that we have made since the election and the plan that we're implementing, it's exactly what I ran on, Mr. Speaker. It's exactly what I said I was going to do. We said we were going to review the assets, Mr. Speaker. We said we were going to balance the budget
member from Oxford, come to order.
We said we were going to invest in transit and transportation infrastructure, none of which they agreed with, Mr. Speaker, but we are implementing the plan that we ran on, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. New question, the member from Timmins, James Bay.
My question is to the Premier. Premier, it's pretty clear and categoric when you listen to Pat Sabera on the tapes with Mr. Olivier what it is that she was doing. She was offering Mr. Olivier a job or an appointment in order to have him stand down so that he could nominate the chosen candidate in Sudbury. So my question is this. Was the Premier in the room when Pat Sabera made that phone call?
Mr. Speaker, there's an investigation going on. That investigation is not going on in this House. That investigation is happening outside of this legislature. I will work with the authorities, Mr. Speaker. I have said that all along. I will continue to say that, and I will do that, Mr. Speaker. That investigation is taking place outside the legislature.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Well, 135 questions, and we still don't have an answer to the basic questions. So I asked the Premier the question. Pat Sabera made a phone call to Mr. Olivier. She was categoric in saying, please stand aside and nominate our chosen candidate, and if you do that, we'll give you a job or an appointment. And my question to you was a simple one. Did you or did you not be party to that discussion by being in the room when Pat Sabera made the phone call? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, when I say that I am going to cooperate and have been cooperating with the authorities, I'm talking about the authorities whose responsibility is to conduct the investigation, Mr. Speaker. And with all due respect to the member opposite, he is not one of those people. And that investigation is not taking place in this House. It is taking place outside this House, and that is where I will be working with the authorities, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. New question, the member from Sudbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my question is for the Minister of Northern Development and Mines. Mr. Speaker, over the past...
The member from Timmins, James Bay, is warned.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So over the past year, there was news of Cliffs Resources moving away from their investments in Eastern Canada as they restructured their operations and planned to sell assets. Some of those assets are in the Ring of Fire. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we heard that Noront Resources had entered into an agreement to acquire Cliff Resources assets in the Ring of Fire. The news that the company's assets are being purchased to be developed is big news for Northern Ontario, Mr. Speaker, and for our province as a whole. So, Mr. Speaker, can the minister please inform the House of this recent news coming out of the Ring of Fire?
Thank you. Minister of Northern Affairs.
I want to thank the hardworking member for Sudbury for that question. And certainly, Mr. Speaker, I think it's very good news that Noront Resources has entered into an agreement to acquire Cliff's assets in the Ring of Fire. Thank you very much. As everyone knows, Noront has been working continuously for some time to develop their Eagle's Nest nickel project in the Ring of Fire, and we quite frankly expect that they will do the same with these chromite properties that they will be acquiring. And with Noront now acquiring those, or obviously when the court approval has to go through, when they do acquire those properties, they're reaffirming their commitment to the Ring of Fire, Mr. Speaker, and validating this government's commitment to developing this region. And we very much recognize the tremendous potential of the Ring of Fire, and now it's very, very clear that industry does as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for his response. This investment by industry affirms the message that I and this government have been sharing with my community on the incredible mineral potential right here in Ontario, Mr. Speaker. I know we're a world leader in mining, but what is just as important to understand is that Ontario is a world leader in mineral financing.
The member from Nipissing.
Anyone who spent time at PDAC this year wouldn't be surprised to know that more global mining projects get financed in Toronto than any other financial centre in the world, Mr. Speaker. I understand that Noront has worked to secure these assets with the support of another company, Franco-Nevada. So, Mr. Speaker, having these two companies investing in Northern Ontario holds very exciting potential for Northern Ontario and Ontario. So will the minister explain what this investment means to the province?
Well, it's very well put by the member for Sudbury in terms of Ontario being such a attractive destination for mining investment. There's no doubt about it. And this particular proposed acquisition confirms what we've been saying all along, Mr. Speaker, that the business case for the Ring of Fire remains incredibly strong. And this investment by Noront Resources, which I should say, I recently joined Noront at the Prospector Developers Association conference when they received the 2015 Environmental and Social Responsibility Award. Pretty special award on there for them as well. When they joined a partnership with Franco-Nevada, Franco-Nevada being one of the world's top mining royalty firms, again, that demonstrates that the significant potential of the Ring of Fire continues to be a very attractive investment. It's important to note as well, Mr. Speaker, I mean, there is interest from many companies. Over 20 companies have got claims in the region to develop the significant resources in the Ring of Fire. We continue to be very committed to it. We're excited about this investment. Thank you.
New question, the member from Simcoe North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question today is for the Minister of Training, College and Universities. Minister, for many months now, Durham College has been trying to partner with the construction industry to build a multi-million-dollar tower crane training program facility and achieve training status at Durham College. I understand MTCU staff, Durham College, ResCon, and other partners are all prepared to go ahead. Only your office is not signed off. When can we expect you to make a positive decision and support a private-public partnership that will train additional tower crane operators for our construction industry?
Thank you. Minister of Training, College and Universities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for that question. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed for skill training in the province of Ontario, and that's why we created the College of Trades, Mr. Speaker, a few years ago, and the college is making a great progress in terms of serving the public as well as serving the tradespeople. In terms of the question, Mr. Speaker, we are working very closely with the training service providers, and we have a number of training service providers across the province where they train skilled people for our province of Ontario in 152 areas of skilled trades, and we will continue to monitor the supply of skilled trade people in Ontario, and we will continue to work with the training centres across the province of Ontario. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Well, thank you very much. You really didn't dwell on my question very much, Mr. Minister. But, Minister, we know you are under pressure from the hoisting engineers not to grant Durham College tower crane training status. But look at the facts. The proposal will cost MTCU no additional money, and it is supported by your own staff. No one should have a monopoly on training, including labour groups. The private-public partnership will create competition. It would increase qualified operators working under safer conditions. Durham College has a remarkable record on all of its training programs. So the question is, everyone is on side to get started on this facility, including the PC caucus. Will you do the right thing? Immediately show leadership and approve the Durham College proposal and quit playing politics with a decision that is actually a no-brainer decision.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you again, and I thank the member for that question. Mr. Speaker, we have 24 community colleges across the province of Ontario. They are the great partners in terms of skills training in the province of Ontario, along with a number of training centres which is run by various groups across the province of Ontario. Actually, this afternoon I'll be meeting with the president of the Durham College to discuss this matter, and as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, we keep a very close eye and monitor the supply and training of skilled trade people for the province of Ontario, not only in that particular field, but in every one of those 152 skilled trades areas in the province of Ontario. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. New question, the member from Windsor West.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Premier, yesterday your Minister of Education said funding cuts to schools were, quote, preposterous. But behind closed doors, the Liberals are saying the exact opposite. Internal documents show that schools face cuts of up to 2% under the Liberals' next budget. That means cuts to special education and ESL programs for the most vulnerable kids. It means more school closures, and it means job cuts for education workers. Speaker, when will the Premier stand up and finally admit that she wants to cut 2% or up to $500 million from schools across the province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, just to repeat what the Minister of Education has said repeatedly, our government has increased school funding to about $22.5 billion this year, Mr. Speaker. We continue to increase funding. That's a 56.5% increase since 2003. And, Mr. Speaker, that's in the face of declining enrollment. So not only have we increased funding, but we've actually increased per-pupil funding when there are fewer students in the system, Mr. Speaker. So we have done that. We will continue to increase the funding to make sure that boards have the resources that they need. But, Mr. Speaker, those local decisions are just that. They have to be made locally. That's why school boards exist, Mr. Speaker. And I believe in school boards. I believe that trustees have a very important role to play. And that role is to make those local decisions that are in the best interest of the kids in their community, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. Premier, I'd like to point out that because of Liberal waste and scandal, and because of chronic underfunding of education, you forced trustees to close schools. Speaker, under the Education Act, the minister has a responsibility to close the gaps in student achievement, but Liberal cuts to education will only make those gaps grow even wider. The TDSB is already cutting 50 special education teachers and support staff because of Liberal cuts. That means larger class sizes and less support for the most vulnerable kids. Across the province, $500 million in cuts will pull the rug out from underneath students in every community. Speaker, how can this government defend cuts to education that fly in the face of its responsibility to students?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as we continue to increase funding across the province, Mr. Speaker, we will work with boards to make sure that they are able to make the decisions that are in the best interest of students. And that includes, Mr. Speaker, decisions around consolidation of schools, Mr. Speaker. You know, the fact is that we have built 725 new schools in this province, Mr. Speaker, and more than 700 additions and renovations. And if the member opposite from Hamilton, I think, who was heckling, if she understood that the fact is that populations change, that school boards have to adapt to those populations, and they have to make decisions to deliver the best program to students. And sometimes that means renovating a school, sometimes it means consolidating two schools, sometimes it means closing one school and building a new school, Mr. Speaker. All of those options are things that school boards look at, and that's how you get the best program delivery at the local level for students.
New question, the member from York South-Weston.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Labour. Speaker, the workers of Crown Metal Packaging have been on strike for 18 months, walking the picket line for 2 winters now in the bitter cold. Mr. Speaker, many of these workers live in my riding of York South-Weston. The last time I asked the minister a question on this issue, he made it clear that the ongoing labour disruption at Crown Metal Holdings was concerning to him. Speaker, the minister stated here in this House that the dispute does not follow the norm in terms of labour relations in our province, and he strongly urged both parties to go back to the table and negotiate a fair deal. Mr. Speaker, through you to the minister, what are you doing as the Minister of Labour to get to the bottom of this matter?
Thank you. Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe, and I think all members do, the best deals that we can get in this are negotiated at the bargaining table through collective bargaining. The Ministry of Labour provides assistance. We provide conciliation assistance. We provide mediation assistance when the parties ask us to intervene in that regard. And we have excellent conciliators excellent mediators. Sometimes, though, Speaker, the relationship between those parties breaks down and we need further action. This is what I think has happened at Crown Metals. We supervised the last offer vote by request of the employer just last year. The employees overwhelmingly rejected that offer. Now, Speaker, after very, very careful consideration, I've taken the rare step of announcing that we're appointing an Industrial Inquiry Commission led by the very well-respected Morton Michnick to inquire into how to resolve the current work stoppage that we're seeing at Crown Metals, Speaker. I think this is an unusual move. Under the circumstances, though, Speaker, I think it's the right move.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for that answer. But the employees at Crown Metals Holdings need answers sooner rather than later. And they've been out on the lines, as I mentioned earlier, for 18 months. They're tired of walking the lines and chanting when no one seems to be listening. And so we need to let them know that we are listening. It's time that the workers know that our government has their backs and that we won't let their struggle go unnoticed. So, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Labour has said he has appointed Morton Michnick as the head of the Industrial Inquiry Commission. Will the minister please explain to this House what the Industrial Inquiry Commission is and what he plans to accomplish through it?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for that very fine question. The Labour Relations Act in this province grants few special powers to the Minister of Labour to intervene when we're having a labour dispute. Under Section 37 of the Act, I've appointed an Industrial Inquiry Commission. As I said, it's being led by the very well-respected Morton Michnick. He's going to look into, report back on the dispute. He's going to bring forward some recommendations as to how he sees us being able to move forward. He's previously served in the role as chair of the OLRB. He's been a panel arbitrator in a wide variety of sectors across this continent, Speaker. The Industrial Inquiry Commissioner will have 3 weeks to consult with the parties involved. He'll report back to me within 14 days of completion. Speaker, I've got full confidence in the abilities of Mr. Michnick. I think he's going to provide sound, reasonable advice. It's essential to understand the best deals are made at the table. I remain very hopeful, Speaker.
Thank you. New question, the member from Wellington, Halton Hills.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Attorney General. Why is the government dragging its feet on the approval of a new courthouse in Halton Region?
Hear, hear. Thank you. Attorney General.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for this question. I know that you have been asking me and many of the members on my side too about this new courthouse. It's a priority for this government, and I've been to Milton and to visit the courthouse there. I know that we need a new courthouse. It's a priority, again, I'm saying, but we'll have to wait and see with the next budget. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The urgent need for a new courthouse in Halton Region was covered in a big article in the Toronto Star on January the 23rd. I've actually toured the Milton Courthouse last September to see for myself, and simply put, the existing court facility in Milton is aging, overcrowded and inadequate in terms of security and privacy. I've written the Attorney General numerous times and spoken to her numerous times about this problem. Also asked for a briefing for the Halton area MPPs from the AG staff on the process for new courthouse approvals. We attended that briefing on December 2nd, and we were led to believe that a new Halton courthouse was indeed a priority, as the minister just said today. But just weeks later, the government announced an addition to the courthouse in Brampton, and no mention was made of the need in Halton Region. My question for the Attorney General is quite simple. When will you announce approval for a new Halton courthouse?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, yes, there is quite a few requests on this side of the House. You know, the member of the on my side are asking me on a regular basis about the new courthouse. And yes, we are working. I am working with the judiciary. I'm working with the Lawyer Association. I've been there visiting. There is need. The number one priority that is going forward, it's here in Toronto, but the next one, Milton, it's a growing area, and the decision where the courthouse will be built, it's not made yet, but I know that there is much need there, and thank you for asking the question again.
Thank you. Your question, the member from Parkdale High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. The Liberals have decided to ignore families in the city by cutting $86 million from social housing this year alone. That's what the Liberals are telling Toronto. They're telling them, forget about fixing the backlog, that's for repairs, forget about easing the strain on emergency shelters, and worst of all, forget about the 87,000 families, Mr. Speaker, who are desperately waiting for affordable housing, the worst in Ontario's history. Speaker, does the Premier have any clue what her cuts to social housing will actually mean for struggling families in Toronto?
Municipal Affairs and Housing.
Minister of Municipal
I appreciate the question from the member opposite. She has a well-earned reputation for being a great advocate in Toronto, especially on the social housing front, so thank you for that. I just want to go and correct the impression, though. There's been no cut to housing, social housing in Toronto. In fact, the redevelopment of Regent Park and the legacy of hundreds of homes connected with the Pan Am Games augurs very, very well. What the member opposite, I think, is referring to is the end of the Toronto pooling agreement. Toronto was projecting a shortfall this year of some $86 million, and they may have decided to tag that to something. I don't know. But that has been offset by the uploading that we've gone through. In fact, provincial support of Toronto has increased by almost 700% since 2003. That's a lot.
Answer.
And since 2003, some 600 plus millions has been provided.
Thank you.
In total provincial assistance.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Premier. The Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, and the entire City Council would beg to differ with that response. The Liberals can talk about being progressive, but no progressive government would cut $86 million from Toronto's social housing budget. Over 5 years, the Liberal cuts will mean $500 million funding gap, leading to service cuts and even longer wait lists for affordable housing in the city, which now run between 10 and 12 years. Even more families will be left waiting just to get the housing they can afford. So, Speaker, again, to the Premier, how can the Premier defend such deep, real cuts to social housing?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to elaborate a little bit further on our relationship with Toronto. In 2015, the total benefit of provincial uploads for Toronto is estimated to be $460 million, or about 12% of the residential tax base. And Ontario, I don't know if the member opposite recalls this, but I will remind her if she doesn't. Ontario has already forgiven the outstanding Toronto debenture loan of some $230 million. So we're going out of our way to not only reverse the downloading of the previous government, but to work with Mayor Tory and his council to, as adequately as we can, and do an even better job on the social housing front.
Thank you. Your question, the member from the Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Government and Consumer Services. Mr. Speaker, I recently saw a very disturbing story on the CBC on their show Go Public about a senior citizen who was misled by a door-to-door salesman peddling furnaces. Mr. Speaker, this senior citizen signed an agreement to rent a furnace, an agreement, Mr. Speaker, that she did not understand, and as a result she was charged exorbitant fees. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this is not an isolated incident in this province. Many Ontarians will sign contracts they don't understand, will be pressured into signing contracts for services that they don't necessarily need, and being charged significantly higher prices for those services as a result. As the company who was pushing this contract would not address the problem with this senior, she had to go to the media. Now, the Minister of Government and Consumer Services has been in touch with officials at the CBC and this senior citizen and the company.
Thank you.
Could the Minister please inform the House as to—
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Etobicoke Lakeshore for his timely question and for his consumer advocacy. You could see that he's passionate about the issue. I'm pleased that the company has agreed to replace the individual's furnace and adjust the payments accordingly. Prior to this incident, our ministry had already placed the company on the Consumer Beware List, which alerts consumers about organizations with poor business practices. In fact, through our ministry, we're monitoring these businesses, and this particular one had about 92 different complaints, mostly for misrepresentation. Wow. We've taken steps, Speaker, to protect Ontarians and consumers from predatory door-to-door practices in passing the Stronger Protection for Ontario Consumers Act in December 2013, which was well received in this legislature. The legislation addresses door-to-door sales for water heater rentals, which was a top complaint, requiring a 20-day cooling-off period before entering into the final stage of the agreement, demanding a plain language contract, as well as requiring a call back to consumers. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister for updating us on this situation that was reported on the CBC's Go Public, and for his ministry's proactive approach to the problematic ramifications of these kinds of door-to-door sales. I know door-to-door sales have been an ongoing concern for residents in Etobicoke Lakeshore, as well as throughout the province, and they present really terrible moments of intense pressure sometimes on the most vulnerable residents. And I look forward to seeing the implementation of stricter door-to-door regulations coming into effect next month. Our government has a history of exploring ways to improve conditions for vulnerable residents, and I'm pleased that the Minister is raising this important issue and has acted to resolve this accordingly. Minister, can you please provide advice to Ontarians on how they can better protect themselves from aggressive, high-pressure, door-to-door sales tactics?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did stop the clock. I'd like to give all members a reminder that when you get warned, the next step is to step out. Just thought I'd remind people.
Thanks, Speaker. So I just want to remind all folks that we require a cooling-off period for sales or rentals of any heating device. This means a minimum a 10-day window to reflect on his or her decision. Secondly, I want to encourage all consumers to make sure that they understand which company the salesperson represents. Local utility companies, municipalities, government agencies, and regulatory bodies do not sell door-to-door, so anyone trying to present themselves as such is misleading. Ontarians should never give out their private information by showing their utility bills or personal identification. And as part of any consideration, consumers should check the Consumer Beware List. If any Ontarian feels pressured or taken advantage of by these unscrupulous practices, they should report it to Consumer Protection Ontario, where it will be followed up on. Awareness is the starting point of any major transaction, and we're working hard to ensure that Ontarians ask the right questions.
Thank you. New question, the member from Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister of Transportation. Minister, yesterday at committee, we saw government members throw up roadblocks to enhance road safety on your own distracted driving legislation. We saw government members balking at giving opposition members a chance to even discuss one of the 34 amendments being proposed to strengthen the legislation. I find that difficult to understand, Minister. But what I find even more difficult to understand is why your own parliamentary secretary voted down a specific section of your own bill that will impact enhanced impaired driving penalties. Minister, can you explain what's going on here?
Sure, Transportation.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I always welcome the opportunity to stand in my place in this legislature and to talk about the importance of road safety, and particularly Bill 31, which is the bill that member is referencing. Speaker, just to remind everyone, and I know this was dealt with at committee yesterday, it continues to be dealt with at committee, this is a bill that for the very first time will ensure that we have drug-impaired sanctions included in legislation here in the province of Ontario. It will increase the fines and the penalties and the sanctions for distracted driving, Speaker. It does contain a number of other provisions, and I was thrilled, in fact, Speaker, because at both first and second reading it was a bill that enjoyed unanimous support in this legislature because I know members on all sides of this House representing communities right across this province understand the importance of us moving forward with these measures so that we can continue to be a province that has such a strong track record for road and highway safety. I think it's important, Speaker, for the committee to continue to do its work, to get the bill back here for third reading so we can pass it.
Supplementary.
Exactly, Minister. Yeah, Minister, we want to make Ontario roads safer. That's why we and the NDP put forth a series of worthy amendments to enhance road safety. For instance, to legislate demerit points for distracted driving, to limit window tinting, a suggestion moved forward by the Ottawa Police Service, to improve medical review of licenses. Again, we want to make Ontario roads safer, and yet your members are voting down sections of your own bill. And you're not even willing to listen to opposition calls for enhanced safety amendments. Minister, your Premier has called for partnership, not partisanship. Yeah. Which is it for you?
Thank you. Minister.
Well, Speaker, I'm not going to take advantage of the opportunity provided to me with that last comment because it's important for me to focus on road safety. I know that the committee that's reviewing Bill 31 will continue over the course of this week and the next number of days to do its work, and that committee will do the extraordinary job that it continues to do. But I want to go back to the importance of making sure that Bill 31 becomes
from Lanark, second time.
And I appreciate the member in this particular circumstance bringing forward his support for our desire to make sure that our roads and highways remain safe. I'm going to let that committee continue to do its work, and I'm happy to work with that member and other members on all sides of this House to make sure that we continue to have the safest roads and highways as we have consistently for the last 13 years, first or second in North America for road user safety. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker.
Your question, the member from London Fanshawe.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Premier, I'm sure all members will agree it is always a privilege to rise and speak from this place in one of the most diverse cities in the history of the world, within the most diverse province of this country. This past Saturday was the International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination, where we are reminded that not only does systemic racism continue to exist elsewhere, but it persists here as well. Income inequality, unemployment, and precarious employment continue to disproportionately affect racialized communities in the province. Will the Premier commit today to establishing an anti-racism directorate that will speak to issues on racial inequality?
Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question from the member opposite, and there are many, many ways, I would suggest, across government that we are working to increase equality, to increase equity. It's interesting, Mr. Speaker, when I came into office and when I was made Minister of Education in 2006, I discovered that the word equity had been expunged from all ministry documents by the previous government, and I worked very, very hard to put in place a new policy, Mr. Speaker, and that's when we developed the Equity and Inclusive Education Policy, Mr. Speaker, which later became the body of legislation that has required that the education system basically grapple with these issues. So, Mr. Speaker, whether it's through labour policies or whether it's through education policies, our government has worked very, very hard to make sure that people are treated fairly no matter their background, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Speaker, the NDP government of Ontario first established an anti-racism secretariat to address persistent racial inequalities and inequities in our province. Unfortunately, this position was cut by the Conservatives, and the Liberals passed legislation in 2006. 9 years later, they failed to establish a new anti-racism secretariat. Will the Premier commit today to strike a task force that will examine issues of systemic racism in the province and create a new anti-racism secretariat? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and again, I appreciate the question from the member opposite, and this is something that I have given a fair bit of thought to, Mr. Speaker, because it is an issue that's very, very important to me. And if you know and recognize the people in this caucus, you'll understand that it's important to this whole caucus, Mr. Speaker, that we deal with this issue. So what I know is that as public policy evolves, there are different ways of dealing with issues. I believe that when the NDP government had that secretariat in place, that was a very important thing to do. But I believe today, Mr. Speaker, what's important is that we deal with these issues across government. In every single ministry, Mr. Speaker, in every single policy, we make sure that we put that lens on that ensures equity and that we ask the questions of our policy that make sure that those policies are going to promote equity in the province.
Thank you. New question? The member from Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community and Social Services. Minister, yesterday I had the pleasure of joining you in my riding of Kitchener Centre to announce a very important update on direct funding targets for people who are living with developmental disabilities. As part of the $810 million Developmental Services Investment Strategy in our 2014 budget, your ministry committed to eliminating existing waitlists for people who are in great need of direct funding. As you know, Minister, people who are living with developmental disabilities, their families and frontline workers are telling us that this funding helps them to make individual choices and learning how to live independently. So, Mr. Speaker, could the minister please share with us the progress that is being made in this funding waitlist?
Thank you. Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, and to the member of Kitchener Centre for the question. I was happy to have the member with me at KW Habilitation Services yesterday for some remarkable news. As of February 2015, 14,000 people now have new direct funding to purchase supports and services. That is 14,000 more children and adults since the 2014 budget. This includes approved funding for 6,000 adults with a developmental disability through Passport, 8,000 children with a physical or developmental disability through special services at home. Moreover, we have eliminated the 2014 waitlist for special services at home in just 8 months, well ahead of the 2 years in our 2014 budget commitment.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Minister, we were able to witness firsthand a program called Leg Up, where adults with developmental disabilities are learning skills that are getting them job ready. We watched a class on social skills development, and there are also classes on computer training and food preparation. This very important programming is through the Passport funding. So while all of this is very good news, the developmental services sector has been in very serious need of investment and transformation in other areas for some time. The Select Committee on Developmental Disabilities identified other concerns, including the funding assessment process, residential services, and the safety of some living options. So, Mr. Speaker, how is the minister and her staff responding to all of these other concerns?
Good. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the member does raise some very important points. There are serious concerns facing the developmental services sector in Ontario, and it will continue to undergo significant transformation to meet growing and changing needs in order to be able to offer the supports individuals and their families deserve and need. And we are continuing to make progress. Since Budget 2014, 525 adults have now received new residential supports as we move toward our commitment of 1,400 new urgent residential supports over 4 years. Moreover, my ministry is working with community partners to address the large residential services need. This includes the work of the Developmental Services Housing Task Force, which this month launched a call for proposals on innovative housing solutions. As I made the commitment to the Select Committee on Developmental Disabilities last July when it reported its findings, we are working very hard. We're making significant significant progress. Thank you.
There being no deferred votes, this House stands recessed until 3 p.m. this afternoon.